Welcome back to another episode of Sound and Pals Go to the Movie. This is another Throwback Thursday review, and I'm here with my friend Touly. Say hi, Touly.
Hi, guys.
And today we're going to be reviewing Breakfast at Tiffany's from 1961. Just a fair warning, there's going to be spoilers up ahead, so you've been warned. A young New Yorker socialite becomes interested in a young man who has moved into her apartment building, but her past threatens to get in the way. So let's start by going down the list of cast members in this movie. First of all, we have Audrey Hepburn playing Holly, George Peppard, who plays Paul, or aka Fred. We have Buddy Ebsen, who plays Doc. We have Alan Reed, who plays Sally Tomato. And here's an interesting fact, he's actually the voice of Fred Flintstone from the cartoon series. We have Mickey Rooney, who plays Mr. Yunioshi, the upstairs neighbor. We have the director Blade Edward, and this movie was adapted from a novel from Truman Capote. So let's start off the review by saying this is a movie that's kind of old from 1961, but to me it still holds up in a sense and it misses in some parts. So I'm going to start off by going down my cons. My first con is that it's a different time to relate to issues nowadays, but some issues still hold up, and the core of the movie does still hold up to nowadays. There was an issue with the upstairs neighbor, actually with the casting of the upstairs neighbor, Mr. Yunioshi. He was played by Mickey Rooney, and a lot of people did not like that. There's been issues with it in the 80s to now. It's the fact that Mickey Rooney was playing a Japanese person, and he made fun of it in the making of Breakfast at Tiffany's short documentary from 2006. The director actually addresses this and says that he feels bad because back in those days it was not a big issue when you would cast people to play different race roles. But he says now looking back at it, he feels bad about it and he sees that he did something bad, and if he could go back he would recast them. It seems this is basically prominent if we're going to review old movies, especially older movies from the 60s to 40s, and we do see a lot of casting calls that were made and nowadays it wouldn't fly, and then people do kind of hold these movies to standards from nowadays and they do call out these movies on some fouls. But you got to understand, we have to put our mindset at that time. I'm not saying that it was right, but I'm saying we have to, as reviewers, we have to put ourselves to understand the movie at that time period. There's other issues in this movie that we see females depending a lot on man. Every time a man comes into the movie, he the one who makes decisions and stuff like that. Nowadays, we don't see that in movies much. So for me, I'm just saying that that's a con that he was casted, but the director did make an apology. I'm not saying that he's forgiving, he just did acknowledge that it was an issue. So moving on. With that, there's a lot more issues that were not resolved in the movie for me personally, based on Holly's character, Paul's character, and even Doc, and everything that happened in the movie. There was too many issues happening at the same time to basically have the story flow smoothly. If I would make this movie again, I would actually make some of the plot lines or storylines stand out more and the other ones kind of fade in the back. But overall, the movie still holds its story, and there is a lot of superficial value at the beginning of the movie with Holly talking about that she wants a luxury life and everything, and we do see that that's a prominent thing in these older films, that women are basically painted as gold diggers, especially in romantic comedies or romantic movies back in the day. Now going to my pro list, based on that last fact, she does go from a superficial person to actually, we do see it in her how she dresses in the movie. She goes from luxury to at the end where it's just basically like a fairly common dress. She does have her hair styled up at the beginning of the movie versus at the end of the movie where she just has it thrown up. So we do see that kind of change in her character, but in a superficial idea, like dresses and carries herself. With that, I thought that was kind of a nice way of portraying her character change through the movie. Another interesting fact that I want to talk about is that this movie actually won an Oscar for the song Moon River, and the reason it's hilarious to me is that Moon River was actually made just for Audrey Hepburn, because it's not that she was a good singer, it's actually that she was a lousy singer or she couldn't reach certain notes, so they had to make it a monotone song that it was basically just within an octave range. It would be easier for her to sing it in the movie, and it won an Oscar. Another interesting fact about the movie is that Audrey Hepburn's character, Holly, was actually envisioned portrayed Marilyn Monroe by Capote, but Marilyn Monroe's agent didn't want her to play a lady who would just go around and sleep with gentlemen for money. So she basically said no, and Audrey Hepburn took the role. And what this is one of the best recognized movies of that time. So I guess, I don't know how you would see it, if it was a bad call on actress Marilyn Monroe's choice, decision or not, to take the movie or drop it, but Audrey Hepburn actually became more popular for this movie. My last pro is that I really enjoyed the sets, how the sets were decorated. Her apartment was really simple, so it really gave it the idea that it was a place that she really didn't want to be in. She wanted to be out and about. Every time that she said anything, she would reference Tiffany's, and we did see them going to the Tiffany store. We did see a lot of outdoor shots of the city. We did see other apartments, and I really enjoyed that aspect of getting to see New York back in the day as a person who lives in the present. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Touly and see how he saw the movie.
Okay, so for this film, for me in particular, Audrey Hepburn, who played as Holly, she was the film. I mean, obviously, she was on the cover of the film poster. Her character sort of summarizes how I feel about the movie overall too. So the movie and Holly's character, they were both very charming, but that sort of played into the movie being a double-edged sword for me, because despite Holly's charm, her character was a little bit, shall I even say, frustrating at times to kind of deal with, and that frustration only began to dissipate as we found more about who she was. But for her to sort of act the way she did in these situations where she made it seem like she was the victim, but she was, at times just taking advantage of the situation, or even like hurting another individual too. Like you brought up Doc in particular. So for example, when Holly asked Paul to go with her and Doc to the bus station, and that was where Holly decided to be upfront with Doc about her not being in love with him anymore, that she's no longer the Lula May that he used to know, that person no longer exists. I mean, we saw through Doc that he was like brokenhearted and stuff, and you could really feel like he still cared for her despite what happened between them and their relationship, and their marriage getting annulled and stuff like that. But still, you could feel that Doc still cared for her. At least Doc had the decency to tell Paul to take care of Holly for him. He gets on the bus, and then Holly goes up to him one more time, and again, this is where like the frustration of her charming character comes from, where she needs to make sure that she doesn't look like a bad guy. So she wanted to at least tell Doc that she still loves him too, but not in that way that she used to. And of course, Doc doesn't say anything, because what do you say to somebody who just said those things to you, and yet still trying to make it right by making it seem like they care? But for me, I just took it more from like, she just doesn't want to be a bad individual too. Sometimes I feel like she just needed to be more honest and just tell them up front and embrace the situation. To me, she didn't really do that until like the end of the movie, which kind of speaks to maybe a little about what you said about the movie being kind of rough around the edges sometimes, particularly how maybe some scenes aren't transitions well to another. For me, I wish her realization as to who she was, like that idea was sat on for a little bit, for her to contemplate what she's been doing in terms of the way she has acted around people, towards people, and even to herself. I'm not saying that she is necessarily a bad individual. I'm just saying I know that she's going through this struggle, this inner struggle of wanting to be somebody different, but the way she's expressing it is not a representative of that person that she wants to be. She's trying too hard, I guess as they would say, to be somebody who she's not, but I guess it's a way to sort of make up or hide the vulnerability of what she wanted to be. She was afraid of becoming what she wanted to become, and because of that, she was seeking a lifestyle that would enable her to sort of just hide away from it. So she was very upfront then about, or and expressive about wanting to marry somebody who was rich. And of course, in today's culture, and Sarah already alluded to it, we call people who just seek that sort of a lifestyle a gold digger. So I think that's part of the relevance of this film in general, in terms of its cultural impact, that it's sort of in a lot of ways paved the way to current films, how some of these characters are portrayed now. You could easily trace it back to Audrey Hepburn's role as Holly. Even the way she looked, and again, something that Sal already pointed out, but, it was very glamorous, particularly for most of the film until you started seeing more of her character. But, her having all these jewelry on with her fancy hairstyle and whatnot, it really resembled what she was trying to obtain. But I guess thank God for Paul, who he himself didn't really, at least for me, wasn't in a positive light at the beginning of the film too, because you saw him with a woman. You could even question whether or not he was at the time a gigolo. I'll leave that up to your discretion, but one can argue that too. But again, due to Holly's charm, he started to turn around, and he eventually parted way with the woman that he was seeing, just so that he could, I wouldn't necessarily say be with Holly, but to assist Holly. Maybe he kind of saw through her shenanigans and wanted to be there for her. And you saw that he started to take on that role. It was just natural for him to just gravitate towards her. It's a fortunate, unfortunate circumstance because, again, it's due to her charm. Like, you see that this is her what she's going for isn't natural. It's something that you shouldn't encourage, I feel like, but because of the way she talks, she acts, it makes it seem like she's innocent. And I think it's something that Paul realizes and probably saw through, and maybe he just wanted to be there for her regardless of what would have transpired between the two of them at the end. And for me, even though there was some sort of love interest hovering towards the end of the film between the two characters, when Holly decided to still go to Brazil, despite what Jose said in the letter that Paul read to her, for Paul to react the way he did, I understand. Again, frustration, because after I guess everything that Holly has gone through, after him having to be by her side like this, and for her to still say that she was to go to Brazil, it sort of reflects where Holly is in her life, and maybe her unwillingness to change, or to just see change as well. So I could see how Paul reacted that way, and to me that made his character realistic. But that's where my complaint about part of the film came from that part of the film to the end of the film that led up to what happened between Holly and Paul. I wish they would have sat on that a little bit for Holly to sort of recognize her current state, for her to be able to reflect on it. And so that's where I thought the pacing was a little bit off. And that sort of applied to other scenes as well too, where you sort of get this 1 or 2 weeks later, or them just going through the same scenario over and over just to progress the plot, but you don't really get a lot from it. So if some of the scenes either mattered a bit more, or they showed us something different that would have brought about a greater realization for Holly, along the way, instead of them just telling us, oh, here is Holly in this state, and she's in this state because of such and such happening to her in her life. I would rather see that, plus the revelation of her character slowly changing along the way, instead of us, the audience, just always looking at her charm as the benefactor of her being in these situations. But yeah, culturally, this movie, I recognize the film being really relevant in culture. Sal already mentioned the song Moon River. That has a cultural significance. And I forget where I read this. The dress that Holly wears, it also has a significance in terms of the DC universe. And by DC, I'm talking about the comic DC universe, where, like I said, I don't remember where I read this, but I read that Catwoman, at least maybe either her character or a portion of her character, was based off of Holly's apparel, and particularly the dress. So, to me, I appreciated that because I'm a big fan of Marvel and DC's, movies, cartoon series, comic books, etc., etc. So when I read that Holly's character from Breakfast at Tiffany's sort of influenced that, it made me go, the film had a deeper tie to stuff that I find myself taking a liking to in today's time, or even as a kid growing up, that otherwise I would not have found out if I had not watched Breakfast at Tiffany's. So in the grand scheme, the movie is still good. It's not to say that it didn't have issues either. And I also want to just point out what Sal also mentioned about the landlord, Mr. Yanoshi. For me, I could have lived without that character ever being in the film too. I think it just took away from what the film was about. It was too over the top. So if I had to really point out something that I really just didn't like about the film, rather than just saying this was an issue that they could have just either resolved by doing this or that instead, I think this character alone maybe they could have done completely without. I know it's based off of a book. I don't know how much leeway they took in terms of trying to represent this character, but for me, it just came too over the top. I hate to evaluate a film based off like a character like this, but I will have to because of how, like I said, over the top this character was and how out of place this character was to me. But I guess I digress.
I totally agree with your comments there. That character we could do without. I still not really sure how he's portrayed in the novel, but the way they portrayed him in the movie, it doesn't fit right. The other thing is, I really, like you said, how they solve issues and how they... Okay, let's go back to the ending when they're in the rain and they're looking for cat and then they find the cat and then they end up kissing and then the title, the end. This is classic Hollywood back in the day. They were, I don't know if they rushed things, but they just really simply wrap things up in a spiffy. So this is a common thing for old movies. The other thing is that I do see how some of the dialogue for me was kind of smooth between Holly and Paul. It seemed like they really had chemistry when they had the dialogue. Or I don't know if it was just in the script or they just kind of kept rehearsing and doing it all over again. But to me, it kind of flowed. But then there were some other instances between other characters when they had dialogue that seemed like it was kind of forced. So I do see that, there's some scenes that seemed like it was forced and some scenes that seemed like it was naturally flowing. Back to Holly's character, I really enjoyed how one of the characters put it, that she was a fake, but an honest fake. And that really summed it up for me, that she basically told you she was fake, right off the bat. Like she told Paul when he moved in, oh yes, I go out with men and they give me $50 to go to the powder room every time. She's not lying. She sees Paul since the beginning and she's told him, you remind me of my brother Fred. So she opens up to him and she keeps calling him Fred. Even now, like we've been talking about this character and we call him Fred and Paul and goes back and forth. They're interchangeable. So to me, it seems like she was really open to him. And that's, in a sense, seems like she was open to us. Like she's talking directly to us. She's opening it up to us. I haven't read the novel and it's a Truman Capote classic. And I believe that if I do read it, it's going to be deeper exploration of the characters in his novel. This is a movie, it's an adaptation of a novel, so they have to cut some edges, they have to trim some things and exaggerate others, and this is a classic melodrama. So for that, this movie's extremely out there, like with some characters, and other characters are over the top, but that's just to be expected from a melodrama that's been adapted from a novel. And I still basically agree with Touly that I take this as a classic because it was a representation of what society was back in the day, and at the same time what it's trying to portray and tell us. The same way that dresses and the cinematography is iconic. Once you think of Breakfast at Tiffany's or just hear the word Breakfast at Tiffany's, you automatically think this and the actors and everything behind it. So for that, it's a classic. It stands there along with Gone with the Wind, but I think the novel I would actually enjoy more. So with that said, I'm going to ask Touly for his final grade of this movie.
Again, I'm going to take into account basically Mr. Yanayashi and Holly. Those are pretty much what I'm going to attribute my grade to. Of course, I mentioned some of the stuff that I didn't like and stuff that I did like, but in the end, I'm just going to boil it down to these two characters. Yeah, Mr. Yanayashi is the character who I'm going to have to downgrade the movie based upon. But because of that, that's just me saying I can't get the film a perfect score or anything like that because of his character. But like I said, I sort of just saw this film being represented through Holly's character, through her charm. She's one of those characters who I personally feel I hate to love, but at the same time, I'm attracted to her because I see the inner struggle, or even if I don't see it, I know that there's an inner struggle. I'm just waiting for it to come out so that she could accept it and then become the person who she wants to be, a better person. And at least we got to that point. And for the culture influence, like I mentioned too, I guess I should also throw that in there. I would get the film an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, so I'm gonna actually also do the same thing. I'm gonna deduct a point for the character Mickey Rooney. I mean, I love him as a comic. Back in those days, it was socially acceptable to or portray these characters on TV. But now seeing it from this time, I don't think this character really added anything to the movie. So in that sense, that's why I'm deducting a point from this movie. I give it a 7.5 out of 10. I do believe that if I read the novel, I'm going to get more from the characters. I'm not saying that the characters were not established correctly. I'm saying Holly, I really, like you said, I'm attracted to that character. I want to know more about her. And being an Audrey Hepburn fan, I just think that she was casted as a perfect, lonely character, that she was trying to find herself in this big city and she wanted to recreate herself. And that allured me to this character. Like it seemed like she's simple, but yet so complex that I really want to get to know more of her. So with that said, this wraps up our review for Breakfast at Tiffany's. Please join us next time when we're going to go review Super Mario Brothers, the movie. There's links to our social media down in the description. Hit us up if you have any questions. And remember, keep watching movies.